This is Women in Linux. Welcome to the Women in Linux podcast, exposing women to information and careers in technology.
Thanks for joining Women in Linux with your hosts Tamika Reed and Dee Parler. Today we have with us Big Data and Cloud Architecture Consultant Lynn Langit, who's also the co-founder of Teaching Kids Programming. Lynn, I'm excited to have you here today. I'm always excited, but you have thoroughly tickled me today, and I'm excited for everyone to hear what you have to say. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on, you guys. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today.
All right. So, Lynn, a little bit about your background, how you got into the industry, and how you made your pivot. I think everything about what you have done from what I've seen online doesn't really tell the full story and doesn't tell the story the way you tell it. So I'm looking forward to hearing that.
Yeah, well, I've had several different careers. I had a whole career in business, but because I wanted to start a family and that career wasn't really working with, raising a child, I switched over to teaching technology. I had interactions with technology and business. And so I was teaching on the Microsoft ecosystem, and then I had a child, and I found that I had an affinity for databases just through that teaching. And so then I started a consultancy, for my students, and I had among my clients Microsoft, and I started going to some of the professional shows and helping them with their labs and, some of their stuff. And then I got a job with Microsoft. So I worked for them as a presenter, technical presenter. I was on a team of 62 people, and there were 2 women. So it's kind of had to really earn my chops really, really fast, but have fun doing it. And then I eventually kind of moved over to the SQL Server side because that was a really interesting thing. And I presented all over the world. And I then kind of moved into the cloud stuff at Microsoft really, really, really early when it was just released. And because I live in California, I would be going up to Silicon Valley all the time and representing Microsoft. And I really saw, all the new stuff coming in the data side, like Hadoop and NoSQL. And I saw Amazon, having dominance. And so about 6-7 years ago, I made the big jump and I quit and I became an independent consultant. And I spent the first year of that time learning. 50% of my time, I actually took classes and took projects for nonprofits for free and just kind of went beyond the Microsoft ecosystem. That was the beginning of my journey into Linux, because I was for 14 years on the Microsoft ecosystem only. But I realized when I started my consultancy, the world was changing. And to this day, I'm still working on my Linux skills, but that was when it started.
Right, it's a big change, but it's not a big change. It's a big change in terms of, going from GUI based to being, slowly command line, if you are command line. I don't know. I haven't seen you at the terminal yet, so I want to say that you're at the terminal.
Oh, don't judge. Don't judge.
Oh, she's tough, Lynn. She is tough when it comes to that terminal. You have to listen to some of her training. She is no holds barred with it.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm not against the terminal. I just don't think you need it to learn Linux. After you get familiar with it and you start going to the terminal, most people that I've taught, they're like, oh yeah, that confused me going to the GUI. I just stuck with the terminal. Like they're like, the terminal I'm afraid of. I was like, and you should be. You don't need it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, to this day, I think I'm an effective teacher because I, came to this so much in the middle of my career. I mean, like, for example, this last year, I've been working with this enterprise team as an architect on an IoT project, and they had been a .NET shop, but we decided to go out with, Linux on Amazon and use Node. And so, guiding these guys and gals through the transition, I was much more gentle, I think, than a lot of consultants because I remember how rough it was. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then, too, one thing that you mentioned was you were on a team of 2 when you first started out, and you had to earn your chops. Now, in terms of what what you seen then and what you see now, do you see any differences
around, tech in general, or some specific area?
As far as women being in tech?
Well, yes and no. I mean, it depends on what ecosystem. So, for example, the SQL Server community is about 50% women, and always has been, which I think is just fantastic. And so I'm constantly kind of studying what they do and trying to share that with other tech communities, because frankly, some of the more open source ecosystems, and I'm newer into the Linux ecosystem, but things like some of the newer languages like Rails and Ruby and all those guys, they have been less welcoming to women and me. And I think it's because they're younger, right? And so, I mean, that's kind of my perception. I don't know. I mean, I it's a big difference, though. I'll tell you, going to a conference where it's 50% women versus 5 women. I'm sure you guys
right.
Yeah,
all the time.
Right. So I see some progress, but in some communities, but there's not enough. I mean, it's just a tiny bit of progress. I still end up going to events because I speak a lot all over the world, where, I'm still the only woman in the room. And at first it's fun, but after 8 years, it's not as much fun.
Right. Especially when you're single, but then it's kind of awkward because me and Tam always have this where the guys are like, I'm married. And it's just we just said hello.
Yeah, because they don't even know how to deal with you. Yeah, I know.
Right.
I know. So I know. But the community really does matter. So let's talk about that, because that might be interesting to your viewers. How do these communities, another community that has been really good is the Agile community. I went to the big Agile conference, and that was about 50% women. So some things I noticed, and for conference organizers, is when women feel comfortable, when there's enough women, there's a good balance, or they feel, well cared for because of the code of conduct, they'll actually dress differently. So I don't know if you guys do this. I don't do this so much anymore, but when I first started, I totally dressed like a man, which probably was my bad, but I found that I just had less problems that way. I wore the ugly polo shirt and the khaki pants. But now, because I've been in the industry so long, I just wear whatever the heck I want. I don't care. Even if I'm doing a keynote, I dress like me. But I notice it when I go to conferences. If women feel comfortable, they'll dress with more variety, because women generally tend to dress with more variety. But if women don't feel comfortable, they'll dress like men. I don't know. Do you guys notice that when you go to conferences?
So when we go to conferences, we're always wearing our thermal, which is Women in Linux. So,
we don't care. We don't care.
We really don't care. But what I do notice is that some women do dress up. And I think that may be because they're maybe represented by their job. So their job is business casual. Yeah. But for the most part, most of the men, if they're not doing some type of booth or something like that, are usually in a T-shirt and some jeans and some tennis shoes.
Right.
And I don't know if the expectation there is that the woman should be wearing something else, she should be dressing up, because that's what he has on is probably what he wears to work every single day. And for me, I come, in my space that I've been in, is you don't even dress up. You're only told to dress up when somebody's coming to visit. They're like, well, you got to kind of look presentable.
Right.
And so that's usually what I get. So for me, over the years, it's never been that requirement to wear, something else. If I wanted to, I did it because I wanted to, not because I had to.
Right.
So that's what I've seen. And then you're right, being at the conferences, it is a lonely feeling as well to be the only one that's there. But I can only imagine being the only one there and speaking, because now you take on a whole new vibe, and that vibe is, have to be clear and concise with your points, and make sure you have, information to back that up, because you're going to get that test and someone's going to test you. So it's that approach versus you're sitting in the audience. That's just what I've seen. I don't know if you experienced that, but that's what I've seen.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Way back when I was a trainer, I was taking the SQL Server class, and it was a 5-day class in the evenings. And was a guy teaching it, and one day he was sick, and so there was a woman teaching it, substituting. And I was kind of new in the tech world at this time, and what I saw, and the guy was, not the friendliest guy anyway, is that people would not, sorry, I have to type something really quick here. People were not asking him any questions at all. And then when the woman came in, they just bombarded her with questions, which was so interesting, right? And, I didn't want to overgeneralize because people also have different personalities, but it's something that I've kind of noticed over the years. And I'm a big believer that you work your advantages. And so I think that's why to this day, I'm still a technical trainer. I still do, custom trainings a lot now for different verticals at, different levels. So I might do it almost like an analyst, like an industry look for C-levels. I might do, technical bake-offs for CTOs, that kind of stuff. Like I do training at the level for the people that are interested. So I've kind of turned it into an advantage. Plus, I actually have that tendency, as you can tell, I like to talk. But it was super interesting, right? Like the same class. And so I've kind of noticed that. And so sometimes like this last year, I've been working in this really interesting contract where we do something called mob programming. And it's you work in teams of 3 to 5, and you have 1 or 2 keyboards, but only one is being active, and then 3 huge monitors. And then we rotate on a timer. It's kind of like the next generation of pairing. And so a lot of times I've been the only woman. And when we've had big groups, we retrospect every week, and we, kind of talk about like what went well and what didn't go well so we can get better, right? And so like a few times when the situation was, people were talking over me or not listening because, I don't know, I was a woman or whatever, right? Like I was literally like counting the number of times I got interrupted and telling people. And it was super interesting because they weren't, bad people. It was just an awareness thing, right? And so this whole idea of when should women talk and how much should they talk when there's only one in a group is really, I think, I see it as an opportunity area to help educate people in a respectful way. Because I don't think that there's maliciousness, but I think the reality is, and it's proven out in studies, that women get in when you're like, one in a group of all guys, you get interrupted more, your ideas get not listened to. I think there was a thing at Microsoft where women were trying to amplify each other's ideas. Like if one woman said it, another woman would say, hey, that's a really good idea. So I think that this is actually like a really actionable area for women in technology, but to do it in a really collaborative way, not an aggressive way, like just kind of educate people. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I think that that's true, but I also think it also comes with some type of confidence.
Yeah.
You can't like when somebody interrupts you, you let them speak and you say, okay, and you immediately have to get back into it, because if you don't get back into it, you're going to lose that momentum. That's just what I've seen. And the other thing is that I've seen is being able to talk to people on, not necessarily on their level, but being able to walk up to a person and talk to them and get a good understanding of who that person is, their vibe of that person, understanding how that person body language, what that body language is saying to you, really analyzing that person. So that way when you go to speak, you're kind of catering to who's around you to woo them into what you need to get across. And I think that comes over with time, but I also think that comes over with being able to speak. Like you just have to do it. Like you can't just like, oh, well, they're going to ask me at some point, and it's not they're going to ask you at some point. It's you got to put it out there. You got to be your own champion and your own winner. In that case, that's just how I've done it. Has it worked for me? Yes. Do I get moments where people ignore me? Yes. Do I always come back and say, well, look, I don't know if you guys ever thought about this. I go ahead and interject and say, look, here's some things that you should think about. And I always do that. I let people say what they got to say, and then I just, it's kind of like the drop the mic syndrome. Like that. But that's just what I do. So I don't know if that's going to help anyone, but that's what I do.
And I think the key thing here is respect. If you have the floor and somebody cut you off is just rude. And so, we always want to be politically correct on how people interject on our thoughts. But sometimes you just have to tell people, well, let me finish my thought and then let's expound on that afterwards. And it is what it is. You can't have people bulldoze you, because if they do it once, it's the mom mentality again, where people think they can do it to you all the time. And it's just like, no, give me the floor just like I gave you the floor.
Yeah. So there's a couple like, I don't know, tips, because, I've been doing this for a long time, and I think it's tougher, especially for younger women. So the first tip, and this is unique to me, but I don't know, it seems to work, is my educational background is in linguistics. And so I studied foreign languages and traveled to foreign countries and learned foreign cultures. And I think of tech communities as that. I think of, okay, I'm going to go to this PHP conference. So I don't know PHP. So let me learn about PHP. Let me learn about the problems in the PHP community. Let me learn about what they're focused on. Let me listen to how people communicate. What are the words they use? What's the taxonomy? Let me observe and try to understand the world of the people that I'm communicating with. What tools do they use? Do they use Slack? Do they use something else? I mean, how do these guys or people like to be communicated with, first of all? And then the second thing is when you are talking with people, really, really, like you guys were saying, get a sense of who they are, what's important to them, and be respectful to that person. And I found that, you can communicate with the majority of people in the world. Now, that being said, software developers are developers because they have an engineering mentality. So I have come to understand this over time. But, so I noticed some other people, like my mom, who lives nearby. So I have a lot of programmers over to my house for dinner all the time. She gets so frustrated because she has not grown up with, nor has worked with, this I call it a puzzle solving mentality. So engineers, as we all are, like to solve problems. And so that bleeds over into all of our conversations. So when somebody comes to us with a problem, we maybe aren't as empathetic as non-engineers. We maybe don't say, oh, I understand you feel bad. We just jump to, well, this is how you fix the problem, or this is what you should do. Right. And whether we do that ourselves or whether people do that to us, that's a different way of interacting. And so I found myself both being that and also kind of been on the receiving end when I really just want empathy. You know what I mean? So if you take those two things of the foreign cultures and the engineering mentality, those are two techniques that have really helped me, I think, to communicate more efficiently and effectively in the tech communities. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys.
It makes sense. And it's kind of like a good lead into one of my next questions is how do you get someone who's in school, and really women who are in school, into big data and storage? And say you're at a conference, and just like you said, you have to learn about the conference before you go on what's going on in the industry. But I've been in conferences all the time. People are shy and they don't ask questions. So how do you pull those people in?
So, everybody has a different way to contribute. And I'm going to say something that's always controversial in a woman in tech thing. Personally, although I've tried it and I've had a little bit of success, for me to have an impact on the next generation, mentoring doesn't work. And the reason mentoring doesn't work for me is because I run 2 companies and I'm a single mom, and I don't freaking have the time to be somebody else's mom, basically. And I don't mean to be disrespectful, because for a lot of people, mentoring is a great situation. So I'm like, okay, so I can't mentor. I don't have time. I want to impact more people. So I have this philosophy, which I call micro mentoring, and it really comes around being visible. A lot of the key choices that I made in my career were because I went, well, for example, when I was interviewing for Microsoft to be a developer evangelist, I was very intimidated, even though they came to me and asked me, and I thought, how can I do this job? I don't have a degree in computer science, imposter syndrome, right? How can I do this? So I watched a video of a woman who was on the team. She was in Europe. Her name is Catherine Heller. And I said, wow, she was doing the job. I said, I can do that. Same thing happened when I was a technical trainer. I went and saw all these guys, and I saw one woman teaching. Anita Roddick was her name. And she was teaching her class in a really empathetic way, because I saw guy after guy after guy, and I'm like, they're so nerdy, I can't do it. I saw Anita, she was helping, and I don't mean to be stereotypical. It's not like men can't be empathetic, but I just saw somebody I could relate to. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I can do that. So one of the reasons I do podcasts like this one, is because I am just myself, my own personality, and I want other people who are listening to go, wow, she doesn't have a comp sci degree, but she's the only person in the world who got awards from Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. Wow, right. I could do that too, right? Right. And so that's what I try to do. Number one, I try to just get out there and actually be technical. So, for example, this year I did my first keynote, yay, in Brazil. And I was so scared. Oh my gosh, I was so scared. It was a Java conference and all this, but I prepped really hard and I did an IoT keynote, and I did it because I had been complaining that there weren't enough women who were technical in keynotes, and some really great supportive guys got together and said, we really want you to keynote. So they threw it down, you know what I mean? And so I've had people contact me, women, and say, that was really inspiring. I'm going to try to do, I was just at Google last week, and this friend of mine, Chuk Yui Khan, who's an Android developer, she said, I want to do keynotes. I watched that keynote. I want to do keynotes. So being visible and being technical, number one. Number two, I'm really interested in using technology to do good. And I talk about that all the time. And I think that brings more people into technology, whether it's teaching children or whether, like, the newest thing that I'm going into now, I'm so excited, is I'm going into helping to understand how to scale the cloud to make cancer genomic research better and faster. And so personalized medicine can be more effectively applied. And I tell the story. The reason I'm going into this is because my best friend got cancer. And it was, she's going to be okay, but she didn't have personalized treatment. It was the most hideous thing. She's been my best friend for, 25 years. And, if I could have had the cancer myself, I would have taken it because it was so horrible to watch. And knowing that there are personalized treatments, but because there's not enough tech people who are working with the biologists, I'm starting to do the work. I'm going to go speak at a conference in Australia, even though I feel totally like, oh my God, what am I doing? And I'm talking about it on the podcast because I want to tell people that if you want to do tech for good, then just do it. Just do it. Pick an area and just start working in it, because it's kind of a pet peeve of mine. There's so much tech that's misapplied. Do we really need the next Snapchat? Not that, Snapchat is not horrible, but it's like, if we had all the effort that we put into some of this stuff that is, not of as much social value into things that could really help our society, we really could make a better world. And so I think that's how we attract more people into tech, because I think tech has this justified image of it's, about ad serving and, heaven knows what people do with your data and that kind of stuff. And so I'm really, really, really interested in working in these areas and talking about it. I mean, like, for example, I don't know genomic sequencing, but so what? I don't watch TV. So this is what I'm studying Illumina next gen sequencing at night. And, you can learn anything if you just put the time in. So I know that's a really long answer, but
no, it's a great answer, because it's actually twofold on my list. It's what trends are you seeing happening? Because I know one of the biggest things now is, like, with being HIPAA compliant and what are we going to do with the data and the medical records, which you kind of touched on. But what other trends are you seeing as well when we're talking about data analysis? And I guess a good example would be the genome sequencing and so forth and so on. I know Google has some of the things that they're doing, but what have you seen from, I guess, a trainer perspective and from a data analysis perspective?
So I've been just stunned. I started, looking at this at nights and weekends about 6 months ago. So I'm not full time on it yet, but I'm wrapping up my IoT project and I'm moving into it. And I've just decided that this is my next career phase, because I'll tell you why. So it's been stunning. So what I've discovered is that it seems like the majority of the research, really what they're doing in terms of leveraging the cloud is, if they run out of resources on their desktop, they're just spinning up an EC2 instance. So there's no concept of pipeline, like, get a cluster to do this processing and get a cluster to do that processing and spin it up and spin it down. So I see all these biology studies where they say, well, put the information in an EC2 instance and then wait, 24 hours for the response. And I'm just like, oh my God, you could get this in like 15 minutes on a Spark cluster. Come on, you know what I mean?
Right.
So there's that. And then the other thing I found out, so to me, basically to summarize that, that's a solved problem in other industries. So one of the opportunities is to take this idea of data pipelining. So use different kinds of, databases like a data lake or Hadoop or Spark, or use NoSQL, or use even big relational for the different steps in your pipeline so that you can get to analysis faster so that you can make use of the data. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, there's been, I've read one study, but I read a lot anecdotally about it, that the other big problem in genomics is because people are just, writing scripts or whatever on their desktop or on their EC2 instance. This one study said that 70% of the research that the people had published was not usable in personalized cancer genomics because they couldn't, people who wanted to reproduce the results could not replicate the environment. And I just was like, the hair was standing on my neck because I was saying, wow, Docker, come on, people, So I just feel like we've got these, solutions that we've applied to other industries that if we can apply them, as I was saying, to industries that really could, save people's lives, we could, cancer could be a condition, not a death sentence. Do you know what I mean? Right. I think. And I mean, I'm not a doctor, I'm just learning, but so I think applying big data principles to different verticals is just going to have a profound impact. Another one's education. So in my nonprofit, my dream and vision is to get to create a coding environment that has behavioral information. So like when the kids are typing in, it's Java, and the reason it's Java is because that's what's in high school. So mine hits the middle school, and where the kids drop out is in the middle school because they get the scratch and the squeak when they're in K through 3, which is the graphic stuff. And then there's nothing in the middle school. And I have a number of friends that are AP Java high school teachers, and they tell me that, you just get the hardcore nerds whose parents bought them a computer when they were, 12. And so you miss, this is where the problem is. It's at middle school. All the big group of people who should be learning computational thinking drop out because there's nothing there. So anyway, so my idea is right now we just use Eclipse, but I've been doing some work with a company called CodeEnvy, and I've been looking at some other guys like Codio. The idea is to get a browser-based IDE, first of all, because teachers can't install. It's very difficult to set up no matter how much we simplify the Eclipse install because we have dependencies and we have a custom configuration so that it would be easier for the kids to work with. We remove menus and buttons and stuff like that. But anyway, so the memory. Yeah, right. Yeah. So the dream and vision is that we apply again these computational concepts and patterns to education, and we build a browser-based, customized, emergent IDE that captures behavioral information so that we can at first get the information in aggregate and make our APIs better so the kids can learn, and then eventually we have personalized learning. So, if I had to pick a word around the trend in big data, it would be personalized, but personalized for good. Not personalized so your ad provider can make more money. Do you know what I mean?
Right. In other words, the shift, untapped, and actually an untapped market as well too.
Yeah.
And it's in that that whole conversation to me is always centered around what I call access versus exposure. The kids who have they have access to pretty much anything if you got a phone and you got internet, but you don't have exposure to what you're supposed to use that for, or how you can use that, or how you can learn the next thing, or so forth and so on. So I commend you for that project because a lot of kids really don't have that, and the schools do need to redesign their thinking. Like my always thought process with schools is they teach you to work for somebody and not work for yourself. So if you can, if you can step out of that mindset of what an employer is going to expect versus what you can do as an employer, like how you can employ people, how you can have your friends be your employees, or you guys go back and forth and build a business together. Like we don't really teach that at that level. Like, so if you're teaching programming at that level where it's IDE, not IDE based, but web based, and you can teach a kid how to step outside that mindset of working for somebody or being prepared to work for somebody, because after you taught a kid from K through college that they're going to be prepared to work for somebody, it's ingrained in them to work for somebody. Until you fall off that wagon and you wake up out of the matrix and you're like, oh, well, I can be an employer. I can employ somebody. Oh, I never knew I could do that. Now, how do I do that?
You're listening to Women in Linux.
Speaking of teaching kids programming, how did that actually come about? What were you sitting down one day and you're like, this would be a cool idea, or did somebody bring this idea up to you, or you just seen it in your community?
So when I joined Microsoft as an employee, I really didn't want to join, but I needed to get some stability because of some changes in my personal life. I was a consultant and I really needed to have a job. And so I was feeling sad because I was a successful businesswoman. So I was negotiating. And so a couple tips here. First, you can negotiate with corporates when they want you. The best time to look for a job, right? The best time to look for a job is when get a job is when you don't need one. So I was negotiating with them, and Google has this thing 25% time where you do what you want. I haven't worked for Google, but that's what I've heard. So I just decided I wanted to have that at Microsoft. And so when they were interviewing me, they really wanted me because they wanted to have woman on the team, and I had a trainer background and all this stuff, and they knew me. And I kept on negotiating, and I said, I have an 8-year-old daughter, and there's, 2 women on this team of 60, and I don't like that. And so what can I do while at Microsoft to impact this problem of the lack of women in tech? And they said, well, we have this project called DigiGirls, and it's, summer camps or days, and we fund that. And I said, great, who runs it in Southern California? And they said, no one. And I said, what? And they said, we don't have it. And I said, all right, I'll take this job, and 25% of my job, this is the key, not extra, of my job. So all the things I get paid, bonus, metric on, is going to be to work on women in tech, including running DigiGirls. So I went to start with it, and they sent me, it was kind of weird. I'm from Fargo, North Dakota, and they sent me there because they had bought Dynamics because there was DigiGirls camp. And they said, oh, we have a DigiGirls camp there. You can go check it out and see what they do. And I was so excited because I hadn't been home for a long time. And I went, and the people were very well-meaning, very, very well-meaning. But the curriculum was really bad because they were trying to teach these girls Dynamics, like CRM. And it was like horrible, right? It wasn't relevant. And so I came back and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to do better. And so I sat down with my daughter, and there was a project at Microsoft called Small Basic. And it was one of the guys on the Visual Studio team. He had written a version of Visual Basic using Logo, the thing with the turtle that everybody uses. And he made a simplified IDE, and there was, some coursework, but of course it started with, Hello World in a console window. And my 8-year-old daughter was like, this is boring, Mom. And so they had a manual, and about halfway in, they started drawing like shapes and flowers and stuff like that. And so she's like, and I go, find one thing you like. And so she found this thing, and it was drawing a square, drawing something. And so we wrote a recipe to draw a flower. So we call it the DigiGirls flower. And we wrote English first, so she would know what she was doing, like an English sentence. And then she would have to write the Small Basic code. And then we started with that. And, I started making courseware, and I started hosting DigiGirls events. I started writing recipes. And because there wasn't any curriculum and it was a global program, even though I was the director or whatever for local, I became like the global curriculum person because they didn't have any. So, it was very low bar, right? But the situation was it got tested a lot because it was a global program. And then I was a speaker, on my other side. And I just would say, okay, if I go to, Durban, South Africa for the Tech Ed conference, then I'm going to teach girls. And so I got a lot of practice, right? And like anything else, when you practice it, you get feedback from the kids, and kids don't hold back. So you learn what's good and what's bad, right? So I was doing that, and I ended up teaching, all over the world and blah, blah. So then when I left Microsoft, I was, looking at the space, and Microsoft wasn't the company it is now, and they wouldn't open source Small Basic. They wanted to put it in Windows, and I thought that was too limiting. And so, I examined the education space, and I saw that Java was in high school. And so I worked with some Java developers. I actually paid them. I got a little bit of seed money from the parent of the nonprofit, which is called Mona Foundation. And I took that money and negotiated with my Java programmers to take half rate. You know how you do, right? And so over the years, and it's taken years, we started out, we just did events, but then I wanted to get in the schools. So my daughter was then in middle school, and we saw if we could teach after school. And so one of her teachers, her history teacher of all people, took the class. So my daughter, because I was traveling, so she ended up having to teach it. My daughter basically taught her history teacher. And then we decided we really wanted to go into schools because now he teaches it. And so, I kept working on it. And so now we're up to like 80 lessons. And I'm working directly with 4 school teachers. The biggest thing, and it's free, so it's all over the world. Like I know we're in about 16 states and 10 countries because of my Google Analytics, but because it's free, it's kind of like if you just want to use it, use it. But anyway, so I'm working with this teacher, particularly in Riverside, and he found the courseware, he picked it, he taught himself to program. He's a math teacher, and this is the second year now. He teaches it in school as a regular topic to his 8th graders. And I have to tell you this because I'm so super proud. Last year, at the end of the year, they came to my work. We did a field trip, and they took one of the programming tests that this place gives to potential employees, and a bunch of them passed it. And they're like,
that's cool.
I know. And they're like 13 years old, man. So long story short, it started out as curriculum for events, and now my dream and vision is to get it in middle schools all over the world.
So I do have one question though.
Yeah.
Are they setting up GitHub accounts?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure that
Yes.
they're doing all the work and setting up GitHub accounts so they can have a portfolio.
Exactly.
At least in high school and going up, you know what I mean, to see where you've been and where you're going, you know what I mean. It's kind of cool.
So I have to tell you, this is so freaking cool. So I have a friend, she's awesome. Her name is Katrina Owen, and she wrote this crowdsourced code review website called exorcism.io, and she was
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, she's a good friend of mine. So she works at GitHub now. So this year at GitHub Universe, just a couple months ago, she brought up some people to talk about, getting people to work with GitHub. It was called Stories of Committers, and we little 5-minute talks. And I had the good fortune. She brought me up. It was just fantastic. And I talked about the story of my daughter's middle school teacher, getting him to commit and teaching him GitHub. And it's so funny you say that, because my teacher in Riverside, he and I actually just wrote GitHub lessons for teaching kids programming this year, because we really, just like you, we fundamentally believe these kids need, a portfolio to give them a leg up when they're out looking for jobs.
Right. And not only that, it gives them a leg up in getting into, college, especially when you're starting early. Like you want to go to Stanford, but you program, or you want to test out a programming class. You can say, hey, here's what I've done. Here's where you can find my work, X, Y, and Z, and then go on from there. Give you that one leg up on also looking at projects that hackathons and volunteer work and so forth and so on. It just gives you that edge and advantage that you didn't have that option coming up in high school and college. When I was coming up, it wasn't a GitHub.
For sure.
It wasn't it was a hub. You had the little hub drink.
Computer lab.
The hub.
Computer lab.
And you had the hub drinks. I think that's what they were called. They were called the hub. Those little bitty drinks. But you didn't have what you have now, and it's crazy. And with that being said, like the projects that you're currently working on as a GDE, I'm going to assume kind of encompasses what you're doing now with teaching kids programming as well too. So with that being said, with the projects that you're currently working on at Google and your nonprofit, how do you map out these projects for your customers? Because you do have customers, because you're building this curriculum, so there's your customers there, and then at work. So how do you take a stand back and map out your projects for either one of those?
So I, from a high level, I've kind of evolved to doing three things. So I do teaching kids programming between 25 and 50% of my professional life. And I pretty much, although there was one exception, I pretty much donate my time to that. So it's been a little bit less now because my daughter's getting ready to go off to college and I need to see how much I need to pay for that. But so that just kind of fits in on the side. And I really do that based on, now that we've built the library out to 80 lessons and we build out there's a manual, we had work to do to build it up, right? So I had 1 year where I did like 50%, but now it's just like what teachers need. For example, this was a cool thing. I was in Australia and I gave a talk on it. And this guy came up to me and said, hey, there's no instructions to install this on Linux. And I said, hey, I'm not like the expert on this. And he's a Linux admin, right? And so he was so super cool. And we worked together, we remote paired, and he wrote the instructions because I had installed it once on Linux, once or twice, but I kind of just fumbled my way around and I didn't feel authoritative. But so that was like an ad. So my point is with TKP, I add as people bump into me. It's kind of a pull model. Okay. Like I need this, I need that, right? So on the professional side, I do two things. So I do actual, I sit there with the programmers and code. And I usually only do that for like 1 month or so out of a year because I get too bored. And I like programming, but I don't want to program like 100% of the time. I'm more interested in architecture and building systems and that kind of stuff. But this year, weirdly, with this mob group, I was very interested in the dynamics of mobbing, interested in having an enterprise move off of the Microsoft ecosystem, move into the cloud, and then IoT as well. It was so much new, right? So I'm just wrapping up this contract, and I've been there a whole year. So it's been a kind of an unusual year for me. And I'm now getting in this mode of, the year before I had 35 clients. This year I had 3. So I'm in 2017, I'm probably going to have 35 again because I'm just so interested in so many things. So that goes to the training. So the training has two aspects. This can be customized, like I was saying, customized training. And because I have this look across the clouds and there's so many new things like with IoT and with, personalized medicine, and these are expensive decisions for companies, they bring me in for a day or a week or even a month to do a needs analysis and to make recommendations about what products, maybe build some POCs. So I do a lot of that. That's really fun. But then the other thing that I do is I make courses for right now, what is it? It's still LinkedIn, but it's going to be Microsoft. So lynda.com that got bought by LinkedIn that got bought by Microsoft. Right. So I have some courses coming that I'm going to be working on. I'm going to be doing, I guess I shouldn't say what they are, but they're in these technology areas, and they're very, I can say what's there. My Hadoop course that's there is one of the top courses on LinkedIn. It's had, hundreds of thousands of views. And so, that ecosystem is evolving. So there you go. So these courses are designed to be foundational, and they're multi-targeted. So they're more broad than deep. That people who are trying to get an experience of the technology and an understanding if it'll fit for them. So it's more of an architect view, but yet a little bit deeper than a drawing. I'll do little demos. So I'm like an architect plus. So in terms of mapping out training tutorials, I don't know. I'm kind of self-directed. I say, well, what do I want to learn?
Right.
And I kind of go, maybe
Sounds
I should
like somebody I know.
Look, she could talk about me all she wants to, but in reality,
I didn't talk about anybody. I said it sounds like somebody I know, but as my grandmother says, a hit dog will holler.
Fine. I will holler and I will howl. However, It's more, for me, it's not just about what I want to learn. It's about, like, for me, this is what I do. I go look and see what's going across the board on, Indeed, Monster, anything else, or anything that comes in my email. And I look at the key things that are being highlighted that people are pushing for. What I always see, and just always constant, is somebody always wants somebody that knows Linux. I don't care if you know Ubuntu or if you know Red Hat. They just need somebody that knows Linux. And then on top of knowing Linux, they need somebody that knows some type of security and how to secure that Linux box, whether it's from an application standpoint or whether it's from a security standpoint in terms of firewalls or SE Linux. Then that last one is always kind of tricky, because that's the one where somebody's either in AWS Cloud or Azure Cloud or VMware Cloud or somebody's cloud. Somebody's cloud. And so my approach to that is, hey, these are the 3 basics. And those 3 basics can take years, right? They can take years to master. But if you can get the foundation of those, like the basics of cloud, the basics of security, if you can get those fundamental things, you can get a job.
You're listening to Women in Linux.
Another thing that I do is I go look where the pain is. So like for Hadoop, for example, I didn't do production Hadoop this year. So I build something too. I always have to actually build something. So you're legit, right? But so like I have a friend who works at a company where they have one of the biggest Hadoop clusters in the world. So what we were able to do, I had to sign an NDA, but I got the trouble logs. Like I'm like such a big nerd. It's so convenient that I don't have a TV, because this is the kind of stuff that, like, I'll sit there at night and I'll read the Hadoop trouble logs and I'll go, oh, I need to teach about this because this keeps coming up. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like I will go to the user forums, like for AWS, and I'll look and I'll say, what are the areas where people are being really stuck? And I'll put that into my course. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
And I think that's one of the reasons why, people listen, because, like well, 3 things. I read vendor documentation. I read the manual. I actually build something myself. And then I go and try to know the community, right? So I'll make another example. So I'm going over to this biology conference in Australia, and it's for bioinformaticians or whatever they are. And in addition to presenting at the conference on the Google Cloud, in this case, I'm staying for 4 more days, and I'm taking the tools called Galaxy. It's like a web tool that you can pull in ETL stuff, scripts and stuff to process data. And I'm spending 4 days, and I'm going to sit in the class with these researchers and experience what it's like to use that tool and how they get trained for 4 days, so that I can make my cloud scaling relevant to them, so I can speak their language. So I think like the combination of these different things makes my training accessible to a lot of people and useful. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So,
well, it makes it real world.
Yeah.
Not a theory of, in theory, I learned how to scale, but I never actually scaled.
Right.
There's something to be said about when you go to a class and you have a problem that you face all the time, because I take training courses all the time. And when I go to class, I'm more advanced than what the teacher is or what the teacher is willing to teach, because it comes from a level of, and I understand you got to go into class and saying that the person doesn't know anything, and we're going to build up from that. But it's also a point where people have to say, well, these people are coming in with these set of skills, and maybe we need to incorporate some advanced stuff in there, so that way you can have a reflection of, because I can tell you now, like going into like a class, like learning how to secure the satellite server, or the satellite server to deploy with Puppet, and then you mix in an Ansible playbook or something like that. That's not taught. It's just not taught. So you become the expert in that, and then you ask the question in class because you couldn't get it to work, and they're like, well, we don't do that. It's not supported.
Right. Why am I here?
Well, it's interesting because like I taught classroom training and I wrote technical books, and I don't do either one of those things anymore, because I will not, even though I get constantly asked, I don't think classroom training, I think that's kind of gone by the wayside. Do you know what I mean? So one of the reasons I work with this mob team is there's this whole thing of just-in-time training, which is, it's like the new world, right? Where the architect / expert / trainer is embedded with the team and sits there and codes with them. And then when they hit a problem, you stop and you train on just that one thing, because then they care about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting. It's the new world. And I'm still trying to get my head around that, and also written information, because people under 40, they don't want to read a book. They don't want to read a blog. They don't want to read. They watch a screencast maybe, but they tend to just search. And so the whole space of this is interesting. There's this project I contributed to on GitHub that's super interesting. I'll give you the link at the end. It's called the OG to AWS, or the Open Guide. And it's kind of like, I'm dating myself here, but like a Cliff Notes. Remember Cliff Notes for books? You know what I mean? Like that. And so it's links that are annotated for all the services, and it has like tips, gotchas. And the idea is it's non-Amazon employees, and it's real world people, and it's community crowdsourced. And it's interesting because a week after it came out, it was like 14,000 stars, on the top of Reddit, on the top of Hacker News, everybody paying attention, everybody using it. We have a Slack. And it's so interesting how we're evolving around how we educate, coming from the classroom and coming from the books. You know what I mean?
Right. And I know exactly which one you're talking about. I posted that in one of my Slack groups. Like, here you guys go. If you haven't seen this, here you go. But I know exactly what you're talking about. And that's an interesting point, just-in-time training is, how do you train someone who is in high school? Like, these kids that are coming out of high school and not being aware of data scientists and architecting the cloud and stuff like that. How do you get that information to them? Like, I do training with Linux and architecting and so forth and so on. But, everyone is always ask me, say, well, can I learn this in 3 months? And I'm like, well, yes and no. You can if you're going to put your face down and just hammer it out. You know what I mean?
I do.
You can. But how do you teach someone? Because you're self-taught and I'm self-taught. So you do the things that I do. You set up a lab, you set up your own environment, and you learn and you read the manual, and you go back and forth through a book, or you scan the web. It wasn't, now you have all these different websites that have solutions. But how do you get that person who may be in tech, at the beginning of it, or not in tech? How do you get them to train and keep that train going?
Well, it's a push-pull, and sometimes I got to tell you, I was ripping my hair out with some of my clients, because I would say, if you would just, slow down here, people, and maybe take a half an hour and learn what concept X was, rather than just, writing code and wondering why it didn't build or deploy, I think that'd be a better use of your time. But, you gotta kind of meet people where they are. So what I find happens is people are a little bit different. Some people like knowing a little bit more about a situation. So maybe you pull off a couple people and talk to them. Some people are I call them action Jacksons. They're going to keep on, making that mistake. And they'll finally give up when they don't get it. Right. But you have to give them very little pieces of information, just the one thing. So, again, it goes back to the stuff we've been talking about, where you have to find out what is the personality of the people and the technology, and you have to kind of go where they are and engage with them. So one of the things that's been really fun, as I've been getting into IoT, a lot of people I find that do technology are, they like tangible, like they like seeing the light up on the breadboard. And so, I've been, doing some experiments both with children. We've spun off another nonprofit that I don't run. A woman called Jessica Ellis runs it. It's called TKP Labs, and it's affiliated with the Boys and Girls Club in North San Diego. And she runs summer camps with TKP Java, but she also does IoT, because it was cool. They have the facility has a commercial kitchen, and it was built by a patron from San Diego who wanted to have a place for kids to learn nutrition and proper cooking. And Jessica is a gourmet cook. So she got hired to run it, and they have a farm in the backyard, and then they had extra room. And Jessica had the idea to bring computational thinking in. So kind of cool, right? And so they started 2 summers ago with Barbacode, where they cooked and coded. And super interesting. It goes back to what we talked about earlier too. they had more girls than boys. And a really interesting thing, that first summer that Jessica talks about in her talks is all the parents of all the girls, this is very interesting, called her and said, is this camp for girls? None of the parents of the boys did that. So you can kind of see where some of the perception problems coming in.
All the time. And these are adults. We have the same issue with adults.
Yep. But anyway, so in the back of the farm, Jessica and I were walking, and I had been back to North Dakota for something else, and I had noticed how agriculture had changed with all this IoT stuff. And we were talking, and I said, we should IoT up the farm. And so by goodness, she did. And so she's working with the kids, and they've got moisture sensors, and she got a commercial windmill that tweets, and she's designing, it's fantastic. She's designing IoT and data science curriculum with the kids, because we have kids that have now like third year or so through our TKP Java. And so they got the core computational thinking from TKP Java, and then they're applying it to real world problems. Out in California, water is a big problem, even though it's raining right now, water and water conservation. And so the kids decided they wanted to do moisture sensors, and they wanted to get data from the moisture sensors. So the point is, and this is just a different way of being relevant, but you got to find how it's relevant to your audience, and then start using some of this IoT stuff, because that makes it more people get interested in it when they have something tangible rather than just something in their head. So those are my two kind of big tips. So fun. There's we did one more story and then I'll stop with this. Jessica came up with this idea on Pi Day of the Century to do, to have the kids cook Raspberry Pis, and then to put a motion sensor in the Pi and to program it with a Raspberry Pi board when they put their hand over the Pi to do a voice recording to say, "Get away from my Pi."
Back up from my Pi.
We have a video of it. I'll give you a link at the end. It's an awesome event.
That sounds fun. And it sounds like you guys are doing a lot with the kids to trying to get them early.
Yes.
You guys are, for both of the nonprofits, are you just based out of California with that one, or is she willing to branch off and do other locations? Do you guys have a curriculum for that, or it's just kind of like you need to figure it out for yourself?
So the dream and vision, because we were doing, typical nonprofit, we were doing too many things. So for TKP, our focus is right now TKP Java for middle schools. We're starting a little pilot with Android, because my teacher identified that having mobile dev skills would be super important. So that is it's like physically it's a website, it's GitHub repos, it's YouTube videos, and it's something called PenFlip, which is lesson plans. So it's all free. That's all free. Now, if we productize it and we make the browser and we do teacher training, then we'd need more funding, but we haven't gone down that route. So it's like self-serve. The TKP Labs is hosted at the Boys and Girls Club, and they're working to develop camps in a box. And they've been approached by National Boys and Girls Club. So they're in the building phase. They're raising money, they're getting people, but their dream and vision is to make replicatable curriculum and to have like master teachers that can go around and teach for after school and event-based curriculum. So we see it as a nice complement that they do the event-based, and then we do the in-school kind of longer, more complete curriculum. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. It makes total sense. And this is our last question of the day, which is not a question. It's a shameless plug here, where you get a chance to do self-promotion and anything that you want to get out to people, social media, contacting you, any type of videos that you've done, training in the past. Go.
Well, I've been doing it the whole darn time, so I'll try to make it short.
You can remember it all.
I'll try to make it short. Everything's on my name. So Lynn Langit, like dang it. And, you put the links in whatever. So Twitter, Twitter is where I put all my data, my news. I have a YouTube channel with 150 big data screencasts. It's basically me trying out technologies. So that's a nice resource. I have many things on SlideShare, and a lot of those have linked videos. So I tend to put any public presentation I do that I'm permitted to put, I put it on YouTube and on SlideShare. And you can reuse my materials. I ask that it would be nice if you give me credit, but I'm very much, anything I put out there in the open, you can just use it. GitHub repositories, I have code samples for Google Cloud, for Amazon Cloud. So my GitHub is Lynn Langit. And then I have, courses that you have to subscribe to. So I have lynda.com, I have Pluralsight. I think those are the only ones. But yeah, I mean, I always joke, if you cannot find me, you are not looking. And I'd be remiss. I have a blog, lynnlangit.com. And then the kid stuff is teachingkidsprogramming.org, and everything's linked off of that. So it's kind of like a link site for the GitHub and all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Oh, Lynn, we thank you. Lynn, we thank you for your time. We thank you for your words of wisdom. We thank you for
energy.
Actually, good content on keeping your audience engaged as well too. And I think Dee may have some closing remarks for you as well.
I don't. I think Lynn, she killed it. She knocked it out of the park. She dropped. We learned from a colleague of ours this term called digital gems, and you laced us with so many digital gems from all angles from your journey. It was incredible.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the time. I know I kind of go on, but the biggest thing I want to leave people with is, let's use technology to make a better world. And if you are interested in learning and contributing, don't let anybody or anything stop you. You can do whatever you want. Just put the time into it. And, let's work together. There's lots of things that we need to work on, and let's make a better world.
I agree.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Women in Linux podcast. Women in Linux is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization created to get women involved in the field of IT using Linux as a foundation. You can connect with Women in Linux through social media at Women in Linux on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. To join weekly meetups, go to meetups.com/Women in Linux. For more information and to connect with Women in Linux, go to www.womeninlinux.com.